"I'm marrying your enemy," she said. And she said it smiling, the way a person tosses a coin into a fountain, lightly, for luck, expecting nothing back. Weston Hale set down his pen. He set it down the way other men set down a glass they suddenly weren't sure they should be holding. And for 3 full seconds, the tallest office in the harbour district went so quiet that Maren Cole could hear the ice shifting in the water pitcher between them. "Say that again," he said. "I said," she repeated, gathering the deposition folders against her chest, still grinning, "that Tobias Ashford asked me to marry him at the mediation this afternoon, and I told him I'd think about it over the weekend." She tilted her head. "You should see your face right now. Somebody get this man a paper bag." He stood up. That was the thing she would remember later, when everything had gone sideways and there was no laughing it back. But a man who negotiated 9-figure salvage rights without lifting his voice had stood straight up out of his chair over a joke. What he did in the next 5 minutes would cost him the one thing all his money had never once managed to buy. But he didn't know that yet, and neither did she. "That's not funny," Weston said. "It's a little funny." "Maren." "It was a joke, Weston." She dropped the folders on his desk, and they fanned out across the glass. Blue tabs, red tabs, the Ashford Group logo stamped on every cover sheet like a bruise. "It's what we do. You glare, I needle. It's Tuesday." But he wasn't glaring the way he usually glared. She knew all his glares by now. The one for the board, the one for the press, the one he aimed at the skyline at 6 in the evening when he thought no one was watching. This was a new one, and it made the back of her neck go warm, and she did not enjoy that at all. Let me tell you how they got here, because if you start at the tallest office in the harbour, you'll only ever get half of it. 6 months earlier, on a bright, wet morning in March, Maren Cole had walked into Hale Maritime with a box full of borrowed confidence and a résumé that read like a woman who had done everything except the thing she was hired to do. Paralegal, senior litigation team. She had put herself through the certification at night, filing insurance claims by day, and she had learned the law the way you learn a second language when you can't afford a tutor. Slowly, stubbornly, out loud in an empty apartment until it stuck. The lobby of Hale Maritime smelled like cut lilies and cold money. There was a 40-foot wall of blue backlit glass meant to look like the sea, and a security desk staffed by a man who checked her name 3 times. "Cole," she said the 3rd time. C-O-L-E. Like the fish, minus a letter. Like the fuel, minus a letter. "I'm very close to a lot of things." The guard didn't smile. Nobody at Hale Maritime smiled before 9. She'd learned that too. The legal floor was on 22, all frosted partitions and the low hum of very expensive silence. Her supervisor, a brisk woman named Priya, walked her past a row of associates who did not look up. "2 rules," Priya said. 1, we bill in 6-minute increments, so treat your day like a taximeter. 2, she lowered her voice, Mr. Hale reads everything. Everything. If you draft a summary and think, he'll never look at footnote 9, he will look at footnote 9, and he will find the comma you didn't. "Comforting," Maren said. "Does he sleep?" "No one's confirmed it." She met him for the first time over a spilled coffee, which was the least dignified way to meet anyone worth $11 billion. She'd rounded a corner with a full cup and a stack of exhibits and walked directly into a wall that turned out to be a man in a charcoal suit, and the coffee had gone up and out and mostly onto his sleeve. She'd expected the roar. She'd braced for it, actually, the way you brace for cold water. Instead, the man had looked at his ruined cuff, then at her, Then, at the exhibits, she was frantically trying to keep dry against her chest. And he'd said, very evenly, "Save the papers. The suit's insured." That was Weston Hale. Dark hair, going a distinguished nowhere at the temples. A jaw that photographed well and warmed slowly. Eyes the flat green of harbour water in July. He hadn't smiled either. But he'd crouched, a billionaire crouched, in a hallway, and helped her collect the exhibits off the carpet. And when he handed back tab F, he'd noticed it was out of order, and slid it into place without a word. "You're the new Cole," he said. "I'm the only Cole." "You spelled Maritime wrong on your application." She'd felt her stomach drop, and then she'd seen the very faint thing happening at the corner of his mouth, and she'd understood, with the recklessness that would define the whole next year of her life, that this cold, expensive man was making a joke, badly, out of practice, like a piano nobody attuned. "I did not," she said. "Footnote 9, he said, and walked away. She'd gone home that night to her apartment over the laundromat, where the radiators knocked and the whole floor smelled faintly of warm cotton and dryer sheets, and she'd told her cactus, which was the only living thing that would hold still for it, that she was going to last exactly 1 week. She lasted 6 months, and then some. What nobody had told her, what you could not have put on any org chart, was that Weston Hale was a profoundly lonely man. She figured it out slowly, the way you notice a draft. It was in the way he ate dinner at his desk at 8, while the cleaning crew moved around him like he was furniture. It was the single-framed photograph on the credenza, turned at an angle so visitors couldn't see it, that he sometimes touched with 2 fingers when a call went badly. It was the fact that in 6 months she never once heard him mention a person he was going home to. The city outside his windows glittered all summer, like it was throwing a party he'd paid for and hadn't been invited to. She started leaving him things. Not gifts, she'd have died before she called them gifts. A sticky note on a brutal contract that said in the margin, "This clause is a trap, don't step in it." A paper cup of the terrible break-room coffee left by his elbow at 9 at night, because the good coffee machine was on the executive floor and he never went up there when he was working. Once, a single square of the dark chocolate she kept in her drawer for emergencies, set on top of a settlement he clearly hated. No note. He never thanked her for any of it, but the chocolate disappeared, and the next brutal night, at 9, there was a paper cup of the terrible coffee waiting on her desk instead, and she'd stared at it for a long moment before she understood that the current had started running both ways. That was the danger. Not the flirting, which they both would have denied under oath. The care, the way it moved between them, quiet, in food and margins and small corrected injustices, while they both kept their faces perfectly straight and billed in 6-minute increments. And then the Ashford file landed on 22, and everything the harbour had been keeping calm underneath came up to the surface at once. She learned the name Ashford before she ever saw a face. You couldn't not learn it. When the Ashford Group's countersuit hit the legal floor that June, 3 associates went home sick with stress in a single week, and Priya started keeping antacids in a bowl like candy. "Okay," Maren said, dropping into the chair across from Priya's desk with a binder the width of a curb. "Educate me. Who is Ashford, and why does everyone say it like a curse?" Priya glanced at the door and closed it. Outside, the summer light came off the water in hard white sheets, and the air conditioning hummed against the heat pressing on the glass. "Julian Ashford," Priya said. "Used to be Weston's partner. Not a business partner. The partner. They built the first company together out of a leased warehouse when they first started out. Split a desk, split a phone line. Split, apparently, everything." She spun a pen. "Then there was a deal, a big one, a Port Authority contract that would have set them both up for life. And 3 days before the signing, Julian took the whole thing to a competitor, cut Weston out clean, and started the Ashford Group with the proceeds. Maren whistled low. So this lawsuit is 9 years of a grudge, wearing a very nice suit and calling itself commercial litigation, yes. Priya leaned back. So here is my professional advice to a promising young paralegal. Do the work, be flawless, and do not, under any circumstance, make it personal. This file has a body count of careers. Noted, Maren said, and meant it, and lasted about 11 days. The mediation was held in a neutral tower downtown, on a floor with a view and a long cold table, and a bowl of mints nobody touched. She was there to carry documents and take notes and be invisible, which she was extremely good at, until she wasn't. Weston sat at the head of their side, with his hands folded, radiating the particular stillness of a man spending enormous energy on appearing calm. And across the table sat the Ashfords. Julian Ashford was silver and smooth and terrifyingly pleasant, the kind of man who complimented your tie while removing your wallet. But it wasn't Julian who ruined her professional composure. It was the younger one beside him, mid-30s, easy in his chair, sun-browned in a way that suggested a boat he actually used, who caught her eye across the mints during a tense exchange about tonnage and, very slightly, rolled his own. Like, this is all ridiculous, the look said. Like you and I both know these two old lions would rather die than share a fish. She should not have smiled. She smiled. At the break, he found her by the window while she was refilling the water carafe, because that was apparently her life now. Tobias Ashford, he said, offering a hand. Black sheep, reluctant heir. I do the parts of the empire that involve actual boats, which my father finds embarrassing. Maren Cole. I do the parts of the empire that involve staples. A woman of substance. He had a good laugh, unhurried. Can I tell you something disloyal? I don't care about this lawsuit, even slightly. 2 grown men and a 9-year-old bar tab. I'd settle it tomorrow for a handshake and a decent lunch. You should put that in writing, she said. I'll notarize it. Marry me first, he said, hand on his heart, entirely light. The joke of a charming man who made that joke to waitresses and duchesses alike. We'll merge the houses, Romeo and Juliet, but with better lawyers and a prenup. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The whole thing was absurd. The feuding titans, the untouched mints, the summer glaring off the glass. And out of the corner of her eye, she saw Weston Hale across the room, go still in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. She should have clocked it then. She didn't. She was having too good a time being seen by someone who wasn't checking her footnotes. That was the afternoon. That was the whole crime. A charming man made a joke, and she laughed at it. And she carried the story back up to the tallest office in the harbour like it was nothing, like it was a mint from a bowl, and set it down in front of a lonely man to make him roll his eyes. I'm marrying your enemy, she'd teased. And Weston Hale had stood up out of his chair. Now he came around the desk, and the summer evening pressed gold against the windows. And Maren felt the whole easy shape of the last 6 months tilt under her like a deck. Tell me exactly what he said, Weston said. His voice had gone very low and very controlled, which was worse than shouting, which she was starting to understand was always worse than shouting with him. Weston, it was a bit. He does a bit. He's a flirt. He's an Ashford. He's a guy with a boat who thinks the lawsuit is stupid, which, between us, it is. The wrong thing. She watched it land wrong. Something closed in his face like a bulkhead ceiling. "So he's been working on you," Weston said. "Charming. At the water table, while his father tries to take the port contract out from under me a second time." He turned away, jaw tight, and looked at the harbour as if it had personally disappointed him. "How many times have you spoken to him?" "Once, today, for 4 minutes by the carafe." Her own temper came up now, warm and welcome. "And I don't love your tone, counsellor. I laughed at a joke. I didn't hand over the discovery." "You don't understand what these people do." "Then explain it to me like I'm a colleague instead of a leak." That stopped him. For a moment they stood there, the two of them, the desk and its fan of red-tabbed files between them, the ice ticking in the pitcher, the city going molten and beautiful and indifferent beyond the glass. And she saw it then, plainly, the thing she'd been not seeing for 6 months, because it was written all over a face that had forgotten how to hide when it was surprised. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't the port contract. The man wasn't afraid of losing a lawsuit. He was jealous. The knowledge arrived in her chest like a swallowed stone, cold and total. And she opened her mouth with no idea on earth what was going to come out of it. And that was when the private line on his desk lit up, and the little screen glowed with a name that made them both look down at the same instant. Ashford, J. Weston stared at the phone. Then he stared at her. The summer light held its breath. "Don't," Maren said quietly, though she couldn't have said what she was warning him against. He picked it up. "Julian," he said, and his voice was a smooth, cold sheet of water again. The boardroom voice, the nothing-can-touch-me voice. But his knuckles were white around the receiver, and his eyes never once left her face. "It's late for you. What do you want?" She watched him listen. She watched something move through him. Surprise, then a flat and dangerous stillness. Then the beginning of something she had absolutely no name for. "Say that again," Weston said, for the second time that evening. And whatever Julian Ashford said next, on the other end of that line, on that gold summer night in the tallest office in the harbour, made Weston Hale slowly turn his back to the window, look straight at Maren Cole, and go completely, terribly quiet. "No," he said at last, very softly, into the phone, still watching her. "No, she's not for sale." The receiver went back into its cradle with a click that sounded, in that enormous, quiet room, like a door being locked from the inside. Maren waited. The gold had gone out of the windows while she wasn't looking. The harbour had turned the deep, bruised blue of a summer evening, giving up its heat. And somewhere below them, a ferry moaned across the water, long and low, the loneliest sound the city made. Weston did not turn around. He stood with his back half to her, one hand still resting on the phone, as though it might ring again. His shoulders set in a line she had learned to read across 6 months of late nights, the line that meant a man was doing arithmetic he didn't like the sum of. "Weston, give me a moment. You said my name into a phone. To Julian Ashford. You said—" Her voice caught on it, because saying it out loud made it real. "You said, I'm not for sale. So I think I've earned a moment of my own. What did he want?" He turned then, and whatever she'd braced for, the boardroom sheet of ice, the closed bulkhead of a face, it wasn't this. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, uncertain, like a man who had walked into a room he'd built himself and found the floor plan wrong. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand." "Maren, sit down, please." The please did it. He didn't spend those. She could count on one hand the times she'd heard him ask for anything, instead of simply expecting it. She sat, on the edge of the low leather chair, the deposition folders still fanned across the glass between them, like a hand of cards nobody had won. He didn't sit. He walked to the credenza, and she watched his fingers find the corner of the angled photograph, the way they always did when a call went badly. 2 fingers, a small unconscious anchor. And then, as if remembering she could see him, he took his hand away. "Julian Ashford," he said slowly, "has just offered to make the entire lawsuit disappear." The air conditioning hummed. Down in the harbour, the ferry called again. "That's good?" she tried. "That's what you want? No more antacids in a bowl? No more careers with a body count?" "That's not what I want," he said it flatly, and then, catching himself, "It's not the offer. It's the price." "Which is?" He looked at her for a long moment. Out on the water, a tug pushed a barge through the last of the light, patient, enormous, and she had the sudden absurd thought that she'd give a month's pay to be on it instead of in this beautiful, cold room, waiting for a wealthy man to tell her something that was going to hurt. "He wants you," Weston said. The stone came back into her chest, colder this time. "Say that in a sentence with a subject and a verb, counselor, because it landed strangely." "He wants to hire you, away from me, onto the Ashford legal team, at 3 times what I pay you, with a title that would take you 9 years to earn here." A muscle moved in his jaw. "And he wants it announced, publicly. He wants a photograph of you crossing the harbour to their side of it, because Julian Ashford has never in his life wanted a paralegal. What he wants is to take something of mine and hold it up in the light so I have to watch." Maren sat very still. 3 times what he paid her. She hated that the number landed at all, that some small, exhausted animal part of her, the part that had learned the law out loud in an empty apartment over a laundromat, had flinched toward it before her pride caught up. She hated that he'd seen her hear it. "Something of yours," she repeated. That's how he'd put it. "That's how you just put it." He had the grace to look away. She stood up. Her heartbeat was doing something disorderly, and she needed the height for it, needed not to be sitting below him while he decided what she was. "Let me make sure I have the shape of this," she said. "A man I met once, for 4 minutes, by a water carafe, made a joke about marrying me. And his father, who you have hated with your whole expensive heart for 9 years, called your private line at 8 o'clock at night to offer me a job I never applied for, purely so he could watch your face while I took it. And you told him no." She spread her hands. "You told him no on my behalf, Weston, before I'd heard a single word of it." "Because I know what it is." "You don't get to know what it is for me." It came out louder than she meant, and it rang off the glass, and for 1 second they both looked startled by it. She lowered her voice with effort. "You spilled coffee on me in a hallway, and I thought I'd be out on the street by lunch. You made me feel like I had to be flawless in 6-minute increments, or you'd find the comma I missed. And now, when a man finally offers me something without asking me to earn it first, you take the phone, and you decide for me that I'm not for sale. Like the deciding is yours. Like I'm the thing on the table." He came around the desk. Not fast, but he closed the distance, and the room was suddenly too small for the both of them, and the ferry, and the barge, and 9 years of somebody else's grudge. And he stopped close enough that she could smell the cedar and cold coffee of him, the specific human smell of a man who lived at a desk. "You are not the thing on the table," he said, very low. "That is exactly the point. That is why I said no. Because to him, you are a thing on the table. And I would burn this building to the waterline before I'd let him put you on it. The words went through her like the ferry's horn, low and long, and she understood two things at once, standing there in the dark blue ruin of the evening. The first was that he meant every word. The second was that he still hadn't asked her what she wanted. "Then say it to me," she said. "Not to him, not about me, to me." Her chin came up. "What do you want, Weston?" And the tallest office in the harbour went quiet again. And this time, it was a different quiet. And she watched the most controlled man she had ever met open his mouth to answer the one question all his money had never once made him say out loud. The elevator chimed down the hall. It shouldn't have. It was past 8. The floor was dark. The cleaning crew came at 10. But the chime came, bright and ordinary, and then the sound of the glass door on 22 sighing open, and heels on the floor, and Priya's voice calling out, uncertain, into the dark of the legal wing. "Maren? The desk said you were still—" "Oh." Priya rounded the partition into the wash of city light from Weston's windows and stopped dead, taking in the two of them, the fanned folders, the distance that had been closing and now sprang wide as a released spring. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were—" "It's fine," Weston said, and the sheet of ice came down over his face so fast Maren almost heard it. He stepped back. He became, in the space of a breath, entirely the man on the letterhead again. "We were finishing." "We were not," Maren said, but quietly, and only he heard it. "There's a thing you should both see," Priya said, and her voice had a note in it that pulled them both around because Priya did not do notes. Priya did antacids and 6-minute increments and gallows calm. She was holding her phone up like it had gone hot in her hand. "It's already moving. Somebody sent it to the whole industry list 20 minutes ago." "Sent what?" Weston said. Priya turned the screen toward them, and there, glowing in the dark, was a press release on Ashford Group letterhead, silver and smooth and terrifyingly pleasant. And the headline read, "Ashford Group welcomes rising legal talent. A new chapter for 2 great houses." And beneath it, in a photograph she had never posed for, taken through the window of the Neutral Tower that very afternoon, was Maren Cole, laughing, with Tobias Ashford's hand on his heart, mid-joke by the water carafe, in the hard white summer light. Weston did not make a sound. That was the terrifying part. Maren watched him read it, watched his eyes go down the screen and back up, and the stillness that came over him was not the boardroom stillness, and it was not the jealous stillness from an hour ago. It was something older and colder, a stillness with 9 years underneath it. And when he finally spoke, his voice had no temperature at all. "He didn't call to make an offer," Weston said. "He called to tell me it was already done. The offer was theater. He wanted me to say no, so that when this went out, my no would look like a woman I'd already lost." "It's not true," Maren said. "Priya, it's not. I never agreed to anything. I never met with anyone. That's a photograph of a man telling a joke." "It doesn't matter whether it's true." Weston was still looking at the screen. "That's what Julian has always understood better than I have. The truth is slow, and it bills in 6-minute increments. A photograph is instant. By morning, every counsel in this harbor believes my litigation strategy walked out the door and across the water, and half of them believe I let it happen, because I couldn't keep my own house in order." He looked up at her at last, and something in his face had shut so completely that she felt it like a hand pressed flat against her sternum, pushing her back. which, tonight, in this office, would be difficult to argue with.
That's not fair.
No, he agreed. It isn't. Very little about the Ashfords ever is. He straightened his cuffs, the ruined cuff gesture, she thought wildly, 6 months later, the same 2 fingers smoothing the same wrist. And when he lifted his head, he was all the way gone behind the glass. Priya, get corporate communications on the phone. Wake them if you have to. I want a statement drafted that says nothing and denies less. Maren, he stopped. And for 1/2 second the ice thinned, and underneath it she saw the man who had crouched in a hallway to put tab F back in order. The man who left terrible coffee on her desk at 9 o'clock because he'd noticed she stayed as late as he did. Then it closed over again. Go home, he said. It's late. We'll deal with it in the morning.
Weston.
Go home, Maren. And because there was nothing in the whole cold, beautiful room to argue against, because Priya was already dialing and the press release was already glowing on 10,000 screens across the harbor, and the man in front of her had folded himself up and put himself away where she couldn't reach, she picked up her bag, and she left the folders fanned across his desk like a hand nobody had won. And she went. The elevator smelled of cut lilies and cold money all the way down. She didn't remember the walk to the water. She remembered arriving at it, the low iron railing along the harbor promenade, warm still from the day under her palms, the summer night thick with salt and diesel and the sugar smell of a shuttered ice cream cart. The lights of the far shore doubling and breaking in the black water. She stood there and let her heart come down out of her throat, and she pulled out her phone with the intention of deleting the industry email unread, and found instead, sitting at the top of her messages, a number she didn't know. Congratulations, it said. That moves fast. I want you to know I had nothing to do with the photo. I'd never do that to you. It was a joke by a Karath. I meant it as a joke. Tobias. She stared at it. A tug's wake slapped the pilings below her, patient and wet. Then, whilst she watched, 3 dots appeared, and a second message came through. But if you ever do want out from under that iceberg you work for, my offer stands. The real one, not my father's. Coffee, no cameras. You pick the place. She should have turned it off. She turned it face down in the warm iron rail, which was almost the same thing, and not the same thing at all. And she looked at the lights on the far shore for a long time, the Ashford side of the harbour, and she was so angry at all of them. At Julian for the photograph, at Tobias for being kind at the exact wrong moment, at Weston for saying she's not for sale, and then not saying the other thing, the true thing, the thing she'd watched him almost say, that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were nearly on her. You'll want to be careful standing at railings after dark, said a voice she'd heard exactly once before, silver and smooth. People talk. She turned. Julian Ashford stood 6 feet away in the amber light of a promenade lamp, immaculate, hands in the pockets of a linen jacket that had cost more than her year, smiling the smile that complimented your tie while taking your wallet. Behind him, at the curb, a car idled with its lights off. You followed me, Maren said. I happen to be walking. I walk after dinner. My physician insists. He came a step closer and stopped, courteous, exactly at the edge of what a reasonable person could call threatening, and not 1 inch over it. You're upset about the release. I understand. It was vigorous. My people can be vigorous. Your people took a photograph of me through a window without my consent and told an entire industry I'd switched sides. You didn't ask me a single question. No, he agreed, pleasant as a mint. I found questions slow things down. Weston taught me that, actually, a very long time ago, though he'd tell the story the other way. He tilted his head, studying her with a frank curiosity that was somehow worse than hunger. "You're wondering why? A man of my resources, expending a photograph and a press release on a paralegal. It doesn't add up. And you're a person who notices when things don't add up. It's why he keeps you."
He doesn't keep me. I work there.
Julian looked out at the water, at the tallest office in the harbor, with one light still burning near the top of it, and something moved across his smooth face that she couldn't name and didn't trust. "I'll tell you a secret, Miss Cole, since we're being followed and honest. I don't want you on my legal team. You'd be perfectly competent, and I'd never think about you again. What I wanted was to see whether he'd pick up the phone." He turned back to her, and the smile was gone, and what was underneath it was old and tired, and, for one flickering second, almost sad. And he picked up the phone, at 8 o'clock at night, for a paralegal. In 9 years, I have not been able to make that man pick up the phone for $100 million signature. But for you, he snapped his fingers softly, once in the warm dark. Instantly. The water slapped the pilings. Somewhere behind her, a cyclist whirred past, a bright bell gone.
"Why do you hate him?"
Maren said. It wasn't the question she'd meant to ask. It came up out of the cold stone in her chest on its own.
"Everyone tells me the story where you're the one who left. You took the contract. You cut him out. You built all of that."
She nodded at the far shore, the Ashford Towers.
"Out of what was supposed to be his. If anyone gets to walk the promenade at night doing arithmetic they don't like the sum of, it should be him. So why are you the one out here in the dark, following a woman with staples for a job, just to see if he'll answer a phone?"
For a moment, Julian Ashford said nothing at all. The idling car exhaled its exhaust into the summer night. The lamp buzzed faintly overhead, and a moth came apart against it and reassembled, and threw itself in again. "He told you that version," Julian said quietly. "Of course he did. It's the true one, mostly. I did take the contract." He looked at his own hands, silver rings, a tan from a boat he probably never actually used. And when he looked back up, the pleasantness had reassembled itself over his face, like the moth over the lamp, seamless. And she understood the conversation was ending on his terms, because everything did. "Ask him sometime what happened 3 days before I signed it. Ask him about the girl in the photograph on his credenza, the one he turns to the wall so his visitors won't see who's standing next to her." The smile widened, gentle, terrible. "He hasn't told you about her. I can see it on your face. He hasn't told you, and you've left him chocolate on his settlements and terrible coffee by his elbow for 6 months. And he hasn't told you." He inclined his head, a courtly little bow. "Good night, Miss Cole. Go home. It really is late." He walked to the idling car. The door opened for him from inside, and just before he folded himself in, he paused, one hand on the roof, and looked back at her across the warm, dark promenade. "For what it's worth," Julian Ashford said, "I'd take the coffee with Tobias. My son is the only genuinely decent thing either of those 2 houses ever built, and he actually means his jokes." The door shut. The car pulled away without headlights until it reached the corner where the lights came on, red, then white, and it turned and was gone. Maren stood alone at the railing, with her phone face down on the iron, and her heart going like a barge engine. And one light still burning near the top of the tallest office in the harbor. The girl in the photograph, the one he turns to the wall. She had touched that frame 100 times in her mind,
and never once turned it around. She had assumed, she realized now, standing in the salt and diesel dark, exactly what she had assumed. The lazy, soft assumption of a woman who had let herself start to want something. She had assumed the photograph was of no one, a dead account, a closed door. She had built a whole quiet architecture of care on top of a framed picture she had decided, for her own convenience, was empty. He hasn't told you about her. She picked up the phone. She turned it over. Tobias's second message still glowed there. My offer stands. The real one. Coffee, no cameras. You pick the place. And above it, the industry email, unread. 10,000 screens across the harbour, already deciding what she was. She could delete all of it. She could go home to the apartment over the laundromat where the radiators knocked and the whole floor smelled of warm cotton, and tell her cactus she was going to last exactly 1 more week, and mean it this time. Instead, she opened the messages, and she looked at the number she didn't know, and her thumb hovered over the keyboard while the far shore doubled and broke in the black water. She thought about the man who had said, "You are not the thing on the table," with cedar and cold coffee on his breath, and 9 years of hurt underneath his voice. She thought about the man who had not, in 6 months, turned a photograph around. She typed, "I'm not switching sides. I want that clear." The 3 dots came at once, eager. Then, understood. Not sides, just coffee. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, before the good sense Priya kept in a bowl, like antacids, could reach her all the way across the harbour, she typed the place and the time, and she pressed send. And she felt the small, hard click of it go out into the summer night, like a coin into a fountain. Lightly, for luck, expecting nothing back. It was only after, walking home along the promenade, with the water breathing beside her, that she let herself finish the thought she'd been not finishing since the elevator doors closed on the smell of lilies. She hadn't agreed to the coffee because she wanted Tobias Ashford. She'd agreed to it because a man near the top of the tallest office in the harbour had almost said the true thing, and then a phone had rung, and then he'd folded himself up and told her to go home. And because somewhere on a credenza, turned politely to the wall, there was a face she'd never asked to see, belonging to a person he had let her care for him for 6 months without once mentioning. The light near the top of the tower went out. She stood still on the dark promenade and watched it go, that single square of gold winking shut against the summer sky. And she did not know, could not have known, standing there with the warm iron railing under her hand and a stranger's coffee already in her calendar, that behind that darkened window, Weston Hale was at that very moment picking up the phone she'd left glowing on his desk, the office phone, the private line, and dialing a number he had not dialed in 9 years, and that the first words out of his mouth when the line connected would undo everything the photograph had started. But that was still to come. For now there was only the water, and the salt, and the far bright shore, and a woman walking home with a question she hadn't wanted, lodged like a swallowed stone beneath her heart. Who was the girl in the photograph? And why, of all the things his money had never bought him, was that the one he'd chosen to keep turned to the wall? The dryers at the laundromat were already turning when Maren came down at 6:30, and the whole stairwell smelled of warm cotton and dryer sheets, which on any other morning she loved, and this morning could not stand. She had not slept. She had lain on top of the covers in the heat with the window open to the harbour and listened to the ferries call each other across the dark, and every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen the same 2 things. A photograph she had never posed for, and a photograph she had never turned around. The lobby of Hale Maritime smelled like cup lilies and cold money, the way it always did. But the guard who had checked her name 3 times on her first day did not check it now. He looked at her, and then he looked very deliberately at his monitor, and the not looking was so loud that she nearly turned around and walked back out into the summer glare. 22 was worse. The associates, who had never looked up, now looked up. A conversation folded itself, quiet, as she passed the coffee station. Somebody's screen, half turned, showed the Ashford silver letterhead, and somebody's hand moved to darken it. And that small mercy was the cruelest thing anyone did to her all morning. Priya caught her at the partition. She had a paper cup in each hand, and circles under her eyes the colour of harbour water at dusk. "Don't stop walking," Priya murmured, falling into step. "Chin level. You did nothing. Walk like a woman who did nothing." "I did nothing." "I know that. You know that. The floor is a democracy of idiots, and it has already voted." She pressed one of the cups into Maren's hand. It was the terrible break-room coffee, and Maren's throat closed at the sight of it. "He's been here all night. He never left. Corporate comms had a statement ready by 11, and he sat on it. Wouldn't send it." "Why not?" Priya slowed. "I was hoping you'd know." His door was open. That, too, was wrong. He closed it when he worked. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, and his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up. And the harbour behind him was doing its bright, indifferent summer sparkle. 10,000 coins of light on the water. And for one disloyal second, he looked less like the man on the letterhead and more like the piano nobody had tuned. "Close it," he said, without turning. She closed it. And then she saw the credenza, and the coffee went sour in her mouth. Because the framed photograph, the one he touched with 2 fingers when a call went badly, the one turned always at its careful angle to the wall, was gone. Not turned, gone. In its place was a paler rectangle in the wood, where 9 years of window light had never reached. "You moved it," she said. He turned around. He looked like a man who had spent the night doing arithmetic, and had finally, near dawn, arrived at a number. "Sit down, Miss Cole." Ms. Cole. He had not called her that since the hallway and the ruined cuff. It landed like a door closing several rooms away. "You're doing the last name thing," she said. "You only do the last name thing when you've decided something without telling me." "Sit down." "I'll stand. I stood yesterday. I've gotten good at it." He didn't fight her on it. He came to the desk and set his knuckles on the glass, on the fanned folders no one had touched since she'd left them there, and he looked at her with something so carefully emptied of temperature that she understood he'd spent the whole night building it. "There will be a statement this morning," he said. "It will name you as senior counsel on the Ashford matter, effective immediately, reporting to me. It will say that the Ashford Group's release was a misrepresentation of a routine internal promotion, and that any suggestion otherwise is actionable." He straightened. "It goes out at 9. I wanted you to hear it from me first." For a moment, the air conditioning was the only sound in the tallest office in the harbour. "Senior counsel," Maren repeated. "Reporting to you." "It's 3 years early. You've earned 5 of the 3. The firm will survive the other 2. "You promoted me," she said slowly, "to a title I never applied for. Publicly. To an entire industry. At 9 o'clock this morning." She set the terrible coffee down on his desk very precisely, because if she didn't put it down, she was going to throw it. "Weston, do you hear it? Do you hear the shape of it?" Something flickered behind the emptied face. "I'm protecting you," he said. "You're deciding for me. Her voice shook, and she let it. Yesterday, a man offered me a job I never applied for so he could hold me up in the light. And you told him no on my behalf before I heard a word. And I told you, I stood right there and I told you that you don't get to decide what I am. And your answer after a whole night of not sleeping, is to do the exact same thing in your own colors. She spread her hands. He put me on a table to hurt you. You're putting me on a table to win. I'm still on the table, counselor. You just changed whose it is. He didn't move, but a muscle went in his jaw, the ruined cuff muscle. And she watched the sentence land somewhere under the ice and crack it, hairline, silent. That's not, he started. Don't. She was already at the door. Send your statement. Save your firm. But don't you dare call it protecting me. Because I have been protected by men before, Weston. And it always turns out to mean the same thing. She had the handle in her hand, warm from the morning sun through the glass. It means sit still and be grateful, while I decide who you get to be. She got the door open. Behind her, very low, he said, "Where are you going?" And because she was angry, and because she had promised herself on a dark promenade that at least one thing today would be her own choice and not a man's, she said, "To get coffee," and did not tell him with whom. She met Tobias Ashford at a place she'd picked precisely because no one from either house would ever be caught in it. A narrow cafe 3 blocks off the water, where the espresso machine hissed like a small weather system, and the fans turned the summer air around without cooling it, and the pastry case smelled of butter and burnt sugar. He was already there, at a corner table, in a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled, looking exactly as easy in the world as he had looked across the untouched mince. And when he saw her, he stood up, which surprised her, and pulled out her chair, which surprised her more. "You came," he said. "I honestly wasn't sure. I'd have understood a no. I'd have understood a thrown drink. The morning's young." She sat. "I want 3 things clear before you order me anything. 1. I am not switching sides. 2. This is not a date. 3. If you touch your heart and propose again, I'm going to put your hand in that pastry case." He laughed, the good, unhurried laugh. "Understood on all counts. Though, for the record, yesterday's proposal was the most successful joke I've ever told. It reached 10,000 people. His smile went off. "That was my father, Maren, not me. I want you to believe that, and I know you have no reason to. Convince me." He turned his cup a quarter turn on its saucer, a small tell, and for a second he looked less like a man with a boat, and more like a boy who'd grown up in the blast radius of 2 large angers. "You want to know about the photograph?" he said. "The one on his credenza. My father told you to ask, didn't he? It's his favorite move, hand you a locked box and enjoy watching you carry it." The espresso machine shrieked and settled. Maren kept very still. "He said there's a girl in it. Someone Weston turns to the wall." "There is." Tobias looked at her steadily. "Her name is Lena Hale. She's Weston's younger sister." He let that sit. "And 9 years ago, she was 3 weeks from marrying my father." The fan turned the warm air over them. Somewhere behind the counter, a timer went off, and nobody answered it. "His sister," Maren said. "Weston's sister was going to marry Julian. They met at the warehouse. The famous warehouse, the leased one, the split desk. You've heard the legend." Tobias's mouth twisted. "Lena used to bring them dinner because neither of them would stop working long enough to find any. That's how it started. My father was impossible even then, and she was the only person alive who could make him laugh at himself. I was younger then, with a different mother across town, but I remember her. She was the warmest person either of those cold houses ever produced. Present company accepted. He glanced up. You'd have liked her. She was funny the way you're funny. She once notarized a napkin for a joke. What happened? Maren said, and she heard her own voice come out low, because she already half knew, because the shape of it was the shape of the thing she'd walked out of an hour ago. 3 days before the port signing, Tobias said, Weston found out something about the deal. To this day, I don't know exactly what. A clause, a partner. Something that made him certain my father was going to cut him out and take it. Maybe he was right. Knowing my father, he was probably right. He turned the cup again. But instead of going to Julian, he went to Lena. He told her the man she loved was a thief, and he forbade the marriage. Forbade it. Weston was 26 and already running everything, and he thought he could run her too. He told her he was doing it to protect her. The word landed in the little cafe like a stone into still water, and the rings went all the way out to the edges of Maren, and she had to put both hands flat on the warm table. Say the rest, she managed. She didn't take it well, Tobias said quietly. Being decided for, by her brother of all people, the one person who was supposed to be on her side no matter what. She told them both she was finished. My father for whatever he was planning, Weston for thinking her heart was an asset he got to manage. And then, she did the only thing that would hurt them equally. He spread his hands, and in the gesture, Maren saw, horribly, an echo of Weston's own. She took a posting on a research vessel, and she went to the other side of the world, and she cut all of it off. Both of them. 9 years. My father took the contract 3 days later. Pure, scorched earth. He'd lost her, and he wanted Weston to lose everything else. And Weston has hated him ever since for stealing the port. Tobias looked at her. But that's the story he can afford to tell. It's cleaner than the true one. The true one is that Weston drove his own sister off the edge of the map by protecting her. And my father would rather the world blame him for a stolen contract than know he lost the only good thing in his life to a younger man's ego. The fan turned. The butter and sugar smell was suddenly too much. That's why the port doesn't matter to me, Tobias said. It was never about a port. It's 2 men who broke the same woman's heart and have spent 9 years pretending it was about money, because money is easier to sue over than grief. He reached across and, very carefully, did not touch her hand. And now my father has found a woman that iceberg picks up the phone for. You understand what you are to him now. You're the second chance to watch Weston Hale lose the person he can't afford to lose. That's all the photograph ever was. Maren did not remember paying. She remembered the street, the white summer light coming off the pavement in sheets, the harbor 3 blocks down, glinting between the buildings, like something she'd been thrown back toward. She walked, without deciding to, past the shuttered ice cream cart, past the low iron railing, warm under her hand, and her phone was in her fist, though she didn't remember taking it out. And there were 4 missed calls from Priya, and 1 line of text glowing under them. He sent it, Priya had written. 9:01. It's everywhere. And then, 30 seconds later, Maren, where are you? He's asking. Something's wrong with him. He got a call and now he's asking where you are. She stood at the railing and read it twice. A tug pushed a barge through the bright chop below, patient and enormous, and a gull screamed and wheeled and settled. Something's wrong with him. She thought about the pale rectangle on the credenza, where a photograph had lived for 9 years and no longer did. She thought about a man who had spent the whole night deciding to protect her the only way he knew how, which was the way that had already cost him a sister, and who had learned nothing, and who was standing 11 floors up, asking where she was. She thought, he turned it to the wall for 9 years, and last night he took it down. She called Priya back. Priya answered on half a ring. He made a call last night, Maren said. You told me. 9 years, he dialed a number. Priya, who did he call? A silence with the whole harbour in it. I shouldn't, Priya said. Who did he call? His sister. Priya's voice had gone strange and careful. He has a sister. I've worked here 6 years, and I found out last night. Because at 2 a.m, he asked me to book a car for the airport for tomorrow. And I asked, who for? And he said... She stopped. He said, my sister's flight gets in at 4. Lena. Book something quiet. And then he sat down, like his own legs had stopped believing in him. Maren, the man does not have a sister, as far as this entire company knows. And last night he called her, and she's getting on a plane. The barge slid under the promenade and out the other side. Maren gripped the rail. Why now? She said, mostly to herself. 9 years. Why last night? I don't know, but there's something else. Priya's voice dropped. The board's been calling since the statement went out. Not about you, about him. Somebody sent them a second photograph an hour ago. A breath. It's you, coming out of a cafe, 10 minutes ago, with Tobias Ashford holding the door. The gull screamed again. The summer light off the water went, for a second, unbearable. He set it up, Maren said. Julian. He knew I'd go. He wanted the second photo. It doesn't, Priya started, and then didn't finish, because they both already knew how that sentence ended. It doesn't matter whether it's true. The truth was slow and billed in 6-minute increments. A photograph was instant. She took the elevator up through the smell of lilies and cold money, and she did not rehearse anything, which was its own kind of decision. The legal floor had gone quiet as a held breath. Priya met her at the glass and did not say anything, only touched her arm once, which from Priya was practically an embrace. And Maren walked the long carpet to the tallest office in the harbour, with her heart going like a barge engine, and the second photograph already glowing on every screen behind her. His door was open again. He was at the credenza. He had the framed photograph in his 2 hands. He'd brought it back from wherever he'd hidden it at dawn, and he was looking at it, and he did not turn the face of it to the wall when she came in. He let her see him holding it. That, more than anything, told her how far the night had taken him. I know about Lena, she said. He went still. The harbour burned white and enormous behind him. Tobias told me, she went on, at a cafe 3 blocks off the water, where your enemy's father had a photographer waiting, because your enemy's father is very good at his one move. So the board's seen it by now. I know. I know how it looks. I'm not here about how it looks. She came into the room. I'm here because you called your sister last night, after 9 years. And I want to understand why the same night a photograph of me went out was the night you finally picked up that phone. He set the frame down on the credenza, face up, and she saw it then across the room. 3 young people at the mouth of a leased warehouse, sun on all of them. A woman in the middle, with her arm thrown around a younger, softer Julian Ashford, and her other hand reaching back toward the man holding the camera, laughing, caught mid-laugh. Warm, the way Tobias had said. Warm, the way a whole cold house is not. Because I watched myself do it again, Weston said. His voice had nothing left in it to hide behind. Yesterday, to you, on the phone with Julian, and this morning with the statement, I heard myself. She's not for sale. It's for her own protection. I have said those exact words before, in this room, to my sister, 9 years ago, about a man I was sure was a thief. He looked at the photograph and then at Maren. I was probably even right about him, and I lost her anyway. I decided I knew what was good for someone. The sentence broke off. He did not spend the word. The subtext held it. I decided I knew, and I forbade it. And she got on a ship, and I have not heard her voice in 9 years. And last night, I stood here after you left, and I realized I was about to do the whole thing over again, to the only other person who has ever left me chocolate on a settlement. His hand went flat on the credenza, near the frame, not touching it. So I called her. I said, "Lena, don't hang up." And she didn't hang up. And that is the single hardest thing I have done since the last time I let a Hale decide someone else's life for them. The air conditioning hummed. Down on the water, a ferry called, long and low. "Then don't send the statement," Maren said softly. "Pull it. Say I'm your counsel because I chose it, or don't say anything at all. But stop putting me on tables to save me. That's all I ever—" "I can't pull it." His voice cracked flat across hers. "It went out at 9:01. I sent it before I understood what I was doing. And now there is a second photograph of you walking out of a cafe with Julian's son, and it went to my board an hour ago. And by lunch, the story is not that I promoted my counsel. It's that I promoted a woman who was already halfway across the harbor. That I am a man so far gone, I named my own defector senior counsel to save face." He shut his eyes. "He didn't want you. He never wanted you. He wanted this, me, standing here, having done it all to myself, exactly like last time." "Then we fight it," she said, and she took a step toward him, and something in her chest was reaching the way the woman in the photograph reached back toward the camera. "Together, you and me and Priya and the truth, slow as it bills. Weston, I went to that coffee angry. I went because you took a phone call away from me, and I wanted one choice today that was mine. That's the whole crime. I sat with a decent man, and I learned your sister's name, and then I came straight back here to you. Do you understand? I came back." The phone on his desk lit. They both looked at it. The little screen glowed with a name, and it was not Ashford J. It was the front desk, and behind the glass, down the long carpet of the legal floor, the elevator chimed, bright, ordinary, wrong. And the doors sighed open, and there were footsteps, more than one set, hard-soled and unhurried, and coming this way. And Priya's voice rose somewhere out in the dark of the wing, saying no, saying you can't, saying he's in a meeting, and being ignored. Weston looked at the door. Then he looked at Maren, and for 1/2 second, the ice was all the way gone, and what was underneath it was just a tired man, holding the last warm photograph of everyone he'd lost. "That'll be the board," he said quietly. "They move fast when they smell it, faster than Julian even." "Let me stay." "Maren, don't send me home again." Her chin came up. "You did that last night. You folded yourself up and told me to go home, and I went. And look what a night of me not being in the room did. Don't. The footsteps reached the partition. Through the frosted glass, she could see the shapes of them gathering. 3, 4, dark suits in the hard summer light, and the shadow of Priya still uselessly between them and the door. Weston picked up the framed photograph. He held it a moment, his sister laughing between two men who had broken her. 9 years of window light bleaching one corner of it pale.
And then Maren would remember this later, when everything hung on what a man was willing to let people see. He did not turn it to the wall. He set it on the desk, face up, in plain view, where the board and the light and anyone who walked in would have to look at it. "All right," he said. The knuckles of his other hand had gone white, but his voice was level. "Stay. But whatever they say in the next 10 minutes, whatever I have to say back, I need you to remember one thing." "What?" The door handle turned. The frosted shapes leaned in. "That I'm about to do the hardest thing in that photograph," Weston said, "for the second time in my life. And this time I'm doing it out loud, in front of witnesses, so it can't be taken back." He looked at her, and the harbor burned behind him, and the door began to open. "So don't leave the room. Whatever you hear, don't you leave this room." And the door swung wide on the summer light, and the men in dark suits filled it, and at the front of them, silver and smooth and terrifyingly pleasant, holding his own phone like a card he'd been saving, stood not the board at all. Stood Julian Ashford. "Weston," he said, warm as a mint, stepping into the tallest office in the harbor as though he'd built it. "I heard you finally made a phone call." His eyes moved to the frame on the desk, to the laughing woman between the two of them, and something crossed his smooth face that was old and tired and, for one flickering second, almost unbearable. "I heard you called Lena." The smile widened, gentle, terrible. "So did I." Julian Ashford stepped fully into the room, and the summer light came off the harbor behind Weston and fell across the silver of his hair, and he looked, for a moment, like a man walking into a church he'd stopped believing in years ago, but still knew the layout of by heart. "So did I," he said again, softer, as though the first time had cost him more than he'd expected. His eyes had not left the frame on the desk. "I called Lena. Last night. 9:40 my time." A thin smile. "You beat me by 2 hours. You always did beat me by exactly enough to make it insufferable." Behind him, in the frosted glass, the dark shapes of the board had gathered and stopped, uncertain now because the man they'd come to feed to was standing in the doorway ahead of them, and none of them had the nerve to reach around him for the handle. Priya hovered at the edge of the light with her phone still in her hand and her mouth slightly open. "You have 30 seconds, Weston said, "before 4 members of my board come through that door, Julian. Say what you came to say." "I came to see your face." Julian set his own phone down on the credenza, on the pale rectangle where the photograph had lived for 9 years, and Maren watched him do it and understood he'd chosen that exact spot. "I've spent a great deal of money over a great many years to see your face do one specific thing. And last night, apparently, it finally did it, and I wasn't in the room. I've been chasing the moment you'd break, and you broke over a paralegal with staples for a job." "Don't," Maren said. Julian turned to her, courteous, unhurried. "I mean no insult, Ms. Cole. I mean it as the highest compliment I am capable of, which I grant is a low ceiling." He looked back at Weston.
She reached you in 6 months. I had 11 years and a warehouse and a shared phone line, and I never once reached you the way that girl reached my sister with a plate of dinner. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere far below, a ferry loosed its long, low call across the water, and the sound came up through the glass like something the building itself remembered. "Lena," Weston said, and the name came out of him rough, unpracticed, a hinge that had rusted shut. "You called her to hurt me." "I called her," Julian said, "because you called her first. And I have a man at the airline, and I saw her name on a manifest for the first time in 9 years. And He stopped. The pleasantness slipped just for a second, and underneath it was the tired old face from the promenade, the one Maren had seen come apart against the lamp. "I found I could not let her land in this city and go to you and not to me. That is the whole of it. That is the entire 9 years, Weston, if you want it plain in front of your board. I did not take the port because I wanted the port.
I took it because you took her from me first, and I wanted you to know what it felt like to watch something you built walk across the harbor to the other side." The words landed in the room and did not echo. They were too heavy to echo. Maren felt them go through her and out into the 4 dark suits in the doorway, who had gone very still, because whatever they had ridden the elevator up to witness, it was not this. "Get out," said one of them, an older man, grey, a voice like a gavel. He'd pushed forward past Julian's shoulder into the room, and his eyes went from the frame to Weston to Maren and back, with the swift accounting of a man who priced everything. "Hale, we don't know what this is, and we don't want to. What we know is that there's a release out under our letterhead promoting a first-year paralegal to senior counsel, and a photograph of that same paralegal leaving a cafe with the opposing party's son, and a stock price that opened down 4% because the entire harbor thinks Hale Maritime is being run by a man having a personal episode." He set a folder on the desk beside the framed photograph, and the contrast of the two things, the manila and the laughing girl, made Maren's stomach turn. "The board wants the promotion rescinded before noon, and Miss Cole's employment terminated by end of day. It's clean. It's defensible. It ends the story." He looked at Weston without unkindness, which was somehow worse. "Sign it, and this all becomes a bad Tuesday." Sign it. Maren heard the echo of a coin dropped into a fountain, a joke made a lifetime ago across a fanned deck of red-tapped folders, and she felt the whole room tilt again, the way the office had tilted the evening she'd walked in smiling. "No," Weston said. The grey man's jaw worked. "Hale, I said no, Gerald." Weston came around the desk. He did it slowly, the way a man walks on a deck he isn't sure of, and he stopped between the folder and Maren, so that to reach either of them, Gerald would have had to go through him. "You want it clean. I'm going to give you the truth instead, and the truth is never clean. It bills in 6-minute increments, and it takes years, and it costs everything. And I have spent 9 of those years buying the clean version instead. And look what it bought me." He picked up the manila folder. He did not open it. He held it the way Maren had once seen him hold a settlement he hated. And then he set it back down, face down, unsigned. "Miss Cole did not switch sides," he said. His voice had found a level she had never heard from him. Not the boardroom sheet of ice, and not the low, jealous control. Something new. Something that had been under all of it the whole time. "The photograph in the cafe is real, and it means nothing. Because the man who arranged it is standing in my office, and he will tell you himself that he arranged it. Because for the first time in 9 years, Julian Ashford
appears to be tired of lying about why he does the things he does. Julian? Every head in the room turned. Maren watched Julian Ashford stand in the wash of hard summer light, with his phone abandoned on the pale rectangle, and his whole practiced pleasantness held together by nothing. And she watched him make a choice she did not think he'd come up in the elevator intending to make. "I arranged it," Julian said. Gerald blinked. "You?" "The release, the first photograph, the photographer at the cafe, my man, my instruction, my money." He said it lightly, the way he said everything, but his hand had found the edge of the credenza and was gripping it. "Miss Cole never applied to my firm, and never accepted a post, and never, to my knowledge, entertained the idea for a single second. I invented a defection because I have spent the better part of a decade trying to take something from this man, and she was the first thing in years that looked like it would hurt." He inclined his head toward the board, courtly, ruinous. "You may quote me. I'll sign it, in fact. I find I'd rather sign the truth today than the alternative. It's been a long night for everyone with the surname of a warehouse." The room did not breathe. Priya, at the edge of it, had put one hand over her mouth. "That's actionable," Gerald managed. "That's defamation. That's market manipulation. That's—"
"It's all of those," Julian agreed. "I imagine Miss Cole, who I'm told is very good, could paper me into the next decade. I imagine Weston will let her." For the first time, his eyes came back to the frame on the desk, to the girl laughing between the two of them. And the smile went out of him entirely. And what was left was just an old man in expensive linen, looking at the only thing he'd ever wanted. "But I didn't come here to be sued, Weston. I came here to tell you she's landing at 4, and to ask you a question I have not been able to ask anyone in 9 years, because there is no one else left alive who was in that warehouse." Weston went very still. "Did we break her?" Julian said. "Or did she break free of us?" His voice cracked on it, silver gone to rust. "Because I have told myself for 9 years that you drove her off, and I built a great deal on top of that. And last night, she answered the phone, and the first thing she said to me was, 'Julian, I've been happy.' And it took the ground out from under the whole thing. If she's been happy, then I did all of this." He lifted one hand off the credenza and let it take in the towers, the harbor, the lawsuit, the 9 years. For a wound she stopped bleeding from a long time ago. And I don't know what a man does with that. I've never had to find out. The ferry called again, far below, long and low, the loneliest sound the city made, and it filled the office the way water fills a hull. And Weston Hale, the most controlled man Maren had ever met, the man who read footnote 9, who negotiated 9-figure salvage without lifting his voice. Weston Hale reached out and turned the framed photograph a few degrees, so that the laughing girl faced the 2 men who had loved her instead of the window. And he said, quietly, "We broke her. And then she saved herself. Both. That's the part neither of us could ever hold at the same time." He looked at Julian, and something 9 years old and ugly went out of the room through the open door and did not come back. She got on a ship because staying meant being fought over by 2 men who decided her heart was a contract. She didn't run from grief, Julian. She ran from us managing her. And I have spent 9 years hating you for taking the port, when the truth is, I'd have given you the port, and every port after it, to not be the brother who made her feel like an asset on a table. He turned and looked at Maren when he said the last of it, and she understood that he was saying 2 things at once, and that only she in that whole room could hear the second one.
Gerald cleared his throat, lost. Hale, the board still needs. The board will have its statement. Weston's voice snapped back to level, and he turned to face the grey man fully. Here it is. Print it exactly. Hale Maritime withdraws the 9 o'clock release in full. Ms. Cole's promotion is rescinded. Maren's breath caught, and he lifted a hand, not looking away from Gerald. Rescinded, because it was mine to give, and that was the whole rot of it. She'll make senior counsel when she applies for it, and earns it in front of a committee that isn't sleeping with a photograph on its credenza, and not 1 hour before. A muscle moved in his jaw, and Hale Maritime is dropping the Ashford suit. All of it. 9 years of it. Today. The room came apart in noise. Gerald's voice rose over the others. You cannot unilaterally drop a $140 million action. There is a fiduciary. And 2 of the other suits were talking at once, and Priya had lowered her hand from her mouth and was staring at Weston as though she'd never seen him. And through all of it, Julian Ashford stood absolutely silent at the credenza, with his fingers pressed to the pale rectangle, looking at Weston like a man watching a door he'd assumed was bricked over simply swing open. I can, and I am, Weston said, and he did not raise his voice, and somehow that ended the noise. Sue me for it, Gerald, if the board likes. Depose me. Ask me under oath why I dropped it, and I'll tell 12 strangers in a jury box the exact thing I just told this room. And Hale Maritime's share price can survive the truth, or it can't. But I am finished paying 9 years of legal fees to avoid saying my sister's name out loud. He picked the manila folder up again, the clean, defensible one, the one that ended the story, and he handed it back to Gerald unopened. I'm not signing this. I've signed enough things that were clean instead of true. Go tell the board their chairman had a personal episode. They're not wrong. It was 9 years overdue. Gerald looked at the folder in his hands. He looked at Weston. He looked, last and longest, at the framed photograph turned now to face the room. The girl laughing with her arm around a young Julian, and her hand reaching back toward the camera. And whatever he saw in it seemed to take some of the gavel out of him. 4 o'clock, he said finally, heavily. Her flight. 4 o'clock, Weston said. Gerald nodded once, slow, and then he did a thing Maren would remember. He set the clean folder down on the desk, gently, face down, next to the photograph, as though laying something to rest, and he gathered the other suits with a look and steered them out. At the door, he paused. For the record, Hale, 4% is survivable. A dry beat. 6 is where I start drafting the other statement. Land the plane. And then the frosted shapes withdrew down the long carpet, and the elevator chimed, and they were gone. And the tallest office in the harbor was down to 3 people and a photograph. Julian let out a breath that seemed to have been 9 years in his chest. You dropped the suit, he said. I dropped the suit. I spent $4 million last quarter on the suit. I know exactly what you spent, Weston said. I read footnote 9. And Julian Ashford laughed, a short, cracked, astonished sound, nothing like the smooth thing he'd deployed by the promenade. A real laugh, surprised out of a man who hadn't expected to make one in this room ever again. And he pressed the back of his hand briefly to his mouth, and when he took it away, his eyes were bright. She used to say that, he said. Lena, when we'd argue about the business. Did you read footnote 9, or did you just decide? God. He looked at the photograph. You sound like her, I stole it from her. Weston's voice had gone quiet. I've been stealing pieces of her for 9 years to keep from losing all of her. It's a poor way to keep a person, Julian. I don't recommend it. The two men stood on either side of the desk, the laughing girl between them, and something passed across the space that had no words attached to it, and needed none. And Maren, standing at the edge of it, with her heart going like a barge engine, understood she was watching the actual end of the lawsuit, not the paper end, the real one, the one no court could have ordered. I have a car at the curb, Julian said at last, gathering himself, the linen and the silver reassembling but looser now, a jacket worn open. It's a long way to the airport in summer traffic. She asked me not to come. She said, he cleared his throat, she said she'd see me after, that she wanted to see her brother first. He picked his phone up off the credenza and, for the first time, did not make it look like a card he was playing. He just put it in his pocket. So I'll take my car and my 4 wasted million, and I'll wait my turn. It's been 9 years. I can manage an afternoon. He turned to Maren, and he bowed his head, the courtly, ruinous little bow from the promenade. But there was nothing terrible under it now. Ms. Cole, I owe you a retraction and an apology. And, I suspect, a settlement my counsel will hate. You reached him.
I'll spend whatever's left of my dignity being grateful you did, rather than the alternative. A ghost of the old smile. And I meant what I said on the promenade. Take the coffee with Tobias, if you like. He's the only decent thing either house ever made. He glanced at Weston, and the smile turned wry and sad and human. Though I don't think you will. He walked out into the summer light of the legal floor, and his footsteps went unhurried down the carpet, and the elevator took him, and the office was down to 2. For a moment neither of them moved. The harbour burned white and enormous. The clean folder lay face down on the glass beside the laughing girl, and the terrible break-room coffee Maren had set down what felt like a year ago had gone cold at the edge of the desk, and the whole room smelled of cut lilies and cold coffee, and, faintly, cedar, the specific human smell of a man who lived at a desk. You dropped the suit, Maren said, because it was the only steady ground in the room. You dropped a $140 million suit in front of your board and rescinded my promotion, all in about 90 seconds. I did. You realize you just fired me and unpromoted me and set your stock on fire in the same breath. I didn't fire you. He came around the desk, slowly, and stopped a careful distance away, closer than the board would have liked and farther than she wanted. I undecided you. There's a difference. It's the only thing I know how to give you that isn't a table. She looked at him, the circles under his eyes, the sleeves pushed up, the pale stripe on the credenza where a photograph had hidden for 9 years and no longer did. The man who had crouched in a hallway to put tab F back in order. The piano nobody had tuned. Tobias told me the whole thing, she said. At the cafe, before the camera. Lena bringing you both dinner because you wouldn't stop working to eat. The napkin she notarized for a joke. 3 days before the signing. Her voice went low. He said you forbade it. That you told her you were protecting her. I did. He didn't flinch from it. That was new. Every word. And I told myself the same thing about you last night, in this room, and this morning at 9:01. And it took me until an hour ago to hear that it was the same sentence. He looked at the photograph. Protection. It's the word I reach for when I want to control something I'm afraid of losing, and I need it to sound like love. I'm trying to stop reaching for it. I'm not good at it yet. I've had it $11 billion worth of practice at doing it the wrong way. The fan of the air conditioning turned the cool air over them. Down on the water, a tug leaned into a barge, patient, enormous, and Maren watched it through the glass and made herself say the things she'd carried up from a dark promenade. "You never turned the photograph around," she said. 6 months. I left you chocolate on your settlements and terrible coffee by your elbow, and I built a whole quiet thing on top of a picture I decided was of no one, because it was easier for me if the frame was empty, and you never told me it wasn't. Her throat tightened. That's my crime in all this, Weston, if we're billing honestly. I let myself care about a man, and I never once asked what he was turning to the wall. You couldn't have known. I could have asked. I'd have lied. He said it simply. I lied to a board about it an hour ago, and only stopped because I ran out of years to keep paying for the lie. You asking sooner wouldn't have turned the frame, Maren. You leaving chocolate on a settlement for 6 months is what turned the frame. It took that long. It took... He stopped, and she watched him decide to spend a word he'd been hoarding. Watched him do the hard thing out loud, the way he'd promised. It took someone caring for me in 6-minute increments, until I couldn't tell myself anymore that I didn't have anyone to go home to. You were the thing I was going home to, in the office. That's how starved it was. I went home at my own desk, to a woman leaving me coffee, and I called it working late. The words landed in her chest, warm and terrible, and she had to look at the harbor to hold her face together. "That's the saddest sentence I've ever heard," she said, "and it's about me, so I'm allowed to say it." "It's a little sad." "It's a lot sad." "It's improving," Weston said, and there it was, the very faint thing at the corner of his mouth, the badly out-of-practice thing, the joke from a man who could not joke in March, and she felt it go through her like the fairy's horn, low and long. The hero had learned to be funny, and he'd chosen the worst possible morning to prove it. And that was so exactly him that she laughed, wet and startled, and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth the way his enemy had, 10 minutes and a whole lifetime ago. "Don't," she said. "Don't be charming. I've had a very long night about a man being charming at the wrong moment." "Then I'll be honest instead. I'm better at it than I was yesterday." He took a breath, and the harbor burned behind him, and he did not reach for her, and she understood he was refusing on purpose to close the distance, because closing it was one more thing decided without asking. "I'm not going to tell you you're not for sale, because that's mine to say to Julian and never to you. I'm not going to promote you or protect you or put you anywhere. I'm going to tell you one true thing, and then whatever you do with it is entirely, completely, undecidedly yours." He met her eyes. "I love you. I have loved you since roughly the 3rd night you left a paper cup of the worst coffee in the building by my elbow. And I have spent every night since deciding it was something more manageable than that. And I'm finished deciding. That's all. That's the whole statement. It denies nothing." The office went quiet. The different quiet, the one with no ice in it. Maren looked at him, the ruined cuff of 6 months ago, the pushed-up sleeves of tonight, the pale stripe on the credenza, the laughing girl in the frame, turned finally to face the room, and she felt the swallowed stone in her chest turn over one last time and become something else, something that reached, the way the woman in the photograph reached back toward the camera, toward the person holding it. "Okay," she said. "Here's mine. And I'm only saying it once. So read footnote 9. She stepped in. She closed the distance herself,
because that made it hers. I went to that coffee angry at you. I sat across from a genuinely decent man with a boat he actually uses, and he was kind to me at exactly the moment I most wanted a man to be kind to me. And do you know what I did the entire time? She was close enough now to smell the cedar and the cold coffee, close enough to see his throat move. I thought about a lonely idiot 11 floors up who left me coffee instead of thanking me because he didn't have the words for thanking me. I learned your sister's name from your enemy's son, and my whole heart was ache that you'd carried her alone for 9 years. I came straight back to you. I've been coming straight back to you since March, Weston. I just kept calling it work. Maren, I'm not finished. She put one finger against his chest over the specific human warmth of him. You dropped $140 million and my job and your stock price to keep from putting me on a table. It's the most romantic and the most financially irresponsible thing anyone has ever done in my vicinity. And if you ever decide something for me again to protect me, I will notarize a napkin declaring you a menace and mail it to your board. Her voice cracked, and she let it. But you asked. This time you asked. You said it's yours, whatever you do with it. So here's what I do with it. And she kissed him. She decided it, cleanly, herself, in the tallest office in the harbor, with the summer light coming off the water in 10,000 coins, and a laughing girl watching from a frame that would never face the wall again. And it was not a thing either of them had been ordered into. And after a moment, his hands came up, careful, disbelieving, and settled at her back, the way you'd hold something you'd been sure you'd lost. And the ferry called far below, long and low, and for once it did not sound lonely at all. When they broke apart, his forehead came down against hers, and he let out a breath that seemed to have been 6 months in his chest. That's insubordination, he murmured, kissing the chairman. You unpromoted me. I'm just a paralegal with staples. Chairmen kiss beneath their station all the time. It's very Julia Quinn. She pulled back enough to look at him. Read footnote 9, Hale. What time is it? He glanced at the water, at the light. 1:30. Then you have a plane to meet. She stepped back and took his ruined cuff, the same cuff, 6 months later, the same 2 fingers, and straightened it. An absurd small gesture, and he let her. Go get your sister. I'll come if you want me, and I'll stay here if you don't. And either one is completely fine, because it's finally, mercifully, your choice, and not something I decided for you. Weston looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked the framed photograph up off the desk, and he did not put it in a drawer, and he did not turn it to the wall. He tucked it under his arm, face out, where anyone in the elevator would see the girl, laughing between the 2 men who'd loved her badly, and the one, off camera, who'd loved her worst and best. Come, he said, please. And then, because he was learning, and because it was hers, only if you want to. I want to, Maren said. I've wanted to since March. Try to keep up. The airport at 4 in the afternoon in summer was all white light and the smell of jet fuel and warm tarmac, and, absurdly, cut flowers from the kiosk by the arrivals gate. And Maren stood beside Weston in a crowd of drivers holding signs, and felt him go so still beside her that she reached over, without deciding to, and threaded her fingers through his. His hand was cold. His knuckles were white. He had not let go of the framed photograph the entire drive, and he held it now against his chest with his free arm, the way a much younger man might hold a book he was afraid to be seen reading. "What if she's changed?" he said, very low, under the announcements. 9 years. What if I don't? You'll know her. What if she doesn't? She answered the phone at 2 in the morning and got on a plane, Maren said. She wants to be known. Stop billing the next 10 minutes in advance. Just stand here and let it happen to you. The door slid. Travelers came through in a bright, tired stream. Wheeled bags, sunburns. A child asleep on a father's shoulder, safe and heavy and dreaming. And Maren felt Weston's hand tighten to something near pain in hers, and then release all at once, and she followed his eyes. A woman had come through the doors, early 30s now, sun-browned in a way that suggested a boat she actually used, hair going a distinguished nowhere at the temples, in exactly the place his did. Maren saw it, and her breath went. And she stopped just past the barrier, one hand on her bag, and she looked across the white light and the crowd and the drivers with their signs, and she found her brother holding a photograph of herself against his chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. 9 years stood in the air between them, like heat off the tarmac. Then Lena Hale said, across the whole bright terminal, not loudly, but it carried, "Did you read footnote 9? Or did you just decide?" And Weston Hale made a sound Maren had never heard from him, and hoped to hear again. A broken, laughing exhale. And he crossed the space between them without any of the arithmetic, without the deck walk carefulness. And his sister met him halfway. And the photograph got crushed gently between them as they held on. And Maren stepped back into the crowd and let them have it, her own eyes stinging in the jet fuel air, the kiosk flowers sweet and ridiculous beside her. "You brought the picture," Lena said, muffled, into her brother's shoulder. "You kept the horrible picture. My hair looks insane in that picture. It's the only one where you're laughing at both of us." "I was laughing because you'd both just realized I'd notarized the lunch order as legally binding." She pulled back, holding him at arm's length, taking in the temples, the tiredness, the whole 9 years of his face. "Oh, Wes, you look terrible. You look like a man who runs everything." Her eyes flicked past him, found Maren in the crowd, sharpened with a warmth that was unmistakably the warmth Tobias had described, the warmth a whole cold house could not produce. "And you brought a person who's crying by the flower stand and pretending she isn't." "I'm not," Maren started. "She's the one who left me chocolate on my settlements," Weston said. Lena's whole face changed. She let go of her brother, and she came to Maren, and she took both her hands in her sun-browned ones, and she looked at her, with 9 years of exile and an ocean of research vessels, and a hard-won, undecided kind of happiness in her eyes. "You," Lena said, "are the reason my brother called me at midnight for the first time in nearly a decade and said, 'Lena, don't hang up. I've done the thing again. I've done our thing. And I need you to tell me how not to.'" Her grip tightened. "Do you know what he sounded like? He sounded like the boy who used to read me footnote 9. I thought that boy was gone. I got on a plane to see if he was gone." She glanced back at Weston, at the photograph, at the whole warm ruin of the reunion, and then at Maren again, and she smiled. And it was Tobias's easy, unhurried smile, and it was Weston's rusted, rare one, and it was, unmistakably, entirely her own. "He's not gone. You didn't fix him. Nobody fixes a Hale. We're structural. But you left the light on. Thank you for leaving the light on."
And that was the thing that finally undid Maren, standing in the white light with jet fuel and cut flowers and a family stitching itself back together 9 years late. And she cried openly and did not pretend she wasn't. And Weston came and put his free arm around her, the photograph pressed between all three of them now, and somewhere an announcement called a gate, and it was the most ordinary and least lonely sound in the world. Julian was waiting at the curb. He stood by his idling car in the summer heat with his hands in the pockets of his linen jacket, silver and immaculate, and for once, entirely without a card to play. And when the three of them came out through the sliding doors, he did not move toward them. He waited. He'd said he could manage an afternoon, and he had. And now he stood at the edge of what a reasonable man could call hopeful, and not 1 inch over it. Lena stopped when she saw him. Her hand found her brother's sleeve. "You called him too," she said. It wasn't a question. "He called me too," Weston said. 9:40 his time. He beat me by nothing and lost by 2 hours, which I intend to hold over him for the rest of our natural lives. "You dropped the suit." I dropped the suit. Lena looked at the two men, the one beside her holding a photograph, the one at the curb holding nothing. And Maren watched something move across her face that was older than any of them. The particular exhaustion of a warm person who has spent 9 years being the wound 2 cold men bled over. "I didn't come back for the two of you to make up," Lena said to both of them, her voice carrying across the hot pavement. "I want that clear, since clarity's apparently back in fashion in this family. I came back because my brother finally said my name out loud to a stranger. And because I've been happy. And I wanted to be happy where I could see you, instead of an ocean away, pretending I didn't have a phone." She walked toward Julian, unhurried, and stopped in front of him, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a shore he stopped believing in. "You took a port because you lost me," she said. "You spent 9 years and a great deal of money making sure my brother knew how it felt. Julian, I wasn't a port. I wasn't a contract either of you got to sign or lose." Her voice softened, and it was mercy, and it cost her something to give it. "But I hear you dropped $4 million this quarter on a grudge and lost. And I hear you signed a confession to a board this morning. And I hear you waited at a curb when I asked you to. So," she held out her hand, not to be held, to be shaken, a clean thing, an equal thing. "Hello, Julian. It's been 9 years. I've been happy. I hope you're going to be able to say the same someday, because the alternative is exhausting to watch." Julian Ashford looked at her offered hand, and then, slowly, the last of the terrible pleasantness gone from his face, replaced by something raw and grateful and 9 years overdue, he took it. "Hello, Lena," he said. "You'll have to teach me. The happy thing? I've genuinely no idea how it's done. A cracked ghost of the old charm. I'll pay whatever it costs." "It's free," Lena said. "That's the entire problem with it. That's why men like you and my brother could never find it." She let go of his hand and she turned, and she gathered all three of them in a look. Julian at his curb, Weston with his photograph, Maren with her red eyes. And she said dryly in a voice that was pure Tobias, pure Weston, pure herself, "Well, this is the most expensive family reunion in the history of the harbor. And I've been awake for 20 hours, and if someone doesn't buy me a coffee that costs less than a lawsuit, I'm getting back on the plane."
There's a place 3 blocks off the water, Maren said before she could stop herself. Terrible espresso, butter and burnt sugar. No cameras. Lena looked at her, delighted. Oh, I like her, she said to Weston. Keep this one. Don't decide it, just keep her. Ask nicely. I'm working on the asking, Weston said. He is, Maren confirmed. He's improving. It's a little sad how proud we all are. It's a lot sad, Weston said, and Lena laughed, the warm, ruined housewarming laugh. And Julian, at his curb, laughed too, cracked and astonished. And for a moment on the hot, bright pavement, the whole feud stood exposed for what it had always been underneath the money and the lawsuits. 2 men, and the woman who'd loved them both enough to save herself from them. And it did not weigh a thing anymore. Autumn's gala season was still 2 months off, and the harbor stayed hot and gold and generous all through the end of that summer. And the story of what happened at Hale Maritime settled into the shape stories settle into once the photographs stop mattering and the truth catches up. Slow, billing in 6-minute increments. The stock recovered. It always does. 4% is survivable, and Gerald never had to draft the other statement. The suit stayed dropped. Julian Ashford issued a retraction so complete that his own counsel reportedly wept, and paid Maren a settlement she donated, every dollar, to the night certification program where she'd learned the law out loud in an empty room, which annoyed him so thoroughly that he sent a second check, larger, out of spite. And she donated that one too. And the 2 of them developed, against all odds, the wary, fond correspondence of people who have decided to be civilized specifically to irritate each other. Lena took a house across the water, on the Ashford side, on purpose, because she said she'd spent 9 years choosing sides on a map and was finished. She and Julian had coffee on Thursdays. It was not a reconciliation. It was 2 adults learning a thing they'd missed, slowly, badly, out loud. And Maren thought that was probably the only kind of reconciliation that ever actually held. Maren applied for senior counsel in the autumn, in front of a committee that was not sleeping with a photograph on its credenza, and she earned it. And Weston recused himself from the vote entirely and sat outside the room the whole time, turning his own cuff, which Priya photographed and threatened to send to the entire industry list. Do it, Maren told her. Let them see. The iceberg has feelings. It's very embarrassing for him. And the photograph, the girl laughing at the mouth of a leased warehouse, one arm around a younger Julian, one hand reaching back toward the man behind the camera, stayed on the credenza in the tallest office in the harbor, face out, where the light could reach it, where every visitor could see exactly who Weston Hale had turned toward the wall for 9 years, and had finally, at great and public cost, turned back around. There was a night near the end of that summer when Maren came up to 22 at 9 o'clock because the good coffee machine was on the executive floor, and he still never went up there when he was working. And she found him at his desk with a brutal contract and his sleeves pushed up, and she set a paper cup of the terrible break room coffee by his elbow, no note, the way she had 100 times before. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. And he reached into his drawer, her drawer. It had migrated, this was a whole thing now, and took out a single square of the dark chocolate she kept for emergencies, and set it on top of the contract he clearly hated, and slid it across the glass to her. That's mine, she said. You're giving me my own chocolate? I'm returning it, with interest. It's a settlement. The very faint thing happened at the corner of his mouth. Read footnote 9. She picked it up. Under the chocolate, folded small, was a cocktail napkin, and on the napkin, in his precise footnote 9 hand, was written, I, Weston Hale, being of sound mind and terrible practice, do solemnly ask, not decide, not protect, not promote, whether you'd consider spending your evenings somewhere other than a desk. with me. Signed, notarized, if you'll notarize it. Maren looked at the napkin for a long moment. Down in the harbour, a ferry called, long and low, and it did not sound lonely, because they never sounded lonely anymore. Not from this room, not with the light on. You spelled maritime wrong, she said, though he hadn't, though there was no maritime on the napkin at all. I did not. Footnote 9, she said, and she was smiling, and her eyes were bright, and she picked up his pen, the one he'd set down over a joke 6 months and a whole lifetime ago, and she notarized the napkin, an absurd small binding thing, and she pressed it flat on the glass between them, and this time there was no board, no photograph turned to the wall, no phone about to ring, no coin dropped into a fountain expecting nothing back. Just a man who had learned to ask, and a woman who had come back every time, and the summer city glittering beyond the glass like it was finally, at long last, throwing a party they'd both been invited to. Okay, she said. Yes, notarized, legally binding, no take-backs. And she leaned across the desk and kissed him, and the ice in the water pitcher shifted, and somewhere 11 floors down the harbour breathed and turned and carried its ferries home. If this one warmed you, if you believe the quiet ones, the ones who leave chocolate on the settlement and coffee by the elbow are the strongest people in any room, stay with us. Subscribe, and let the next story find you. There's always one more light on near the top of the tallest office in the harbour, and we'll leave it burning for you.